St. Boltoph. For us on the old calendar, although for you here in this congregation in Icon, I know that you will be celebrating St. Boltoph's Day on the 17th of June. For us on the old calendar, the Julian calendar, the ancient calendar, our celebration of St. Boltoph formally must wait another 2 weeks or so. So, perhaps if you'd like to sit down, I'll just say a few words about St. Boltoph's life, particularly aware there's quite a few of you here who perhaps don't know that much about him. Sadly, although St. Boltoph was undoubtedly one of the most important Anglo-Saxon saints of the first millennium, and to whom were raised more churches in his honour than any other Anglo-Saxon saint, at least that I'm aware of, with dedications going right across the United Kingdom, particularly in England, but also going right over, there's a St. Boltoph dedication over in the West Country, and dedications going up right through Norfolk, up into Lincolnshire, Boston, and beyond. There are also dedications to St. Boltoph to be found abroad, in particular in Scandinavia, and you might have picked up in the Troparium, we were singing that his name is praised even unto the fjords of Norway. And indeed in Denmark, in Sweden, and in Norway, the cult of St. Boltoph, the veneration to St. Boltoph, was taken by the early missionaries and by some of the bishops, the hierarchy of the Scandinavian church, who were consecrated in this country. Sadly, the only life we have of St. Boltoph is a very late one. It was written by Abbot Fulcard of St. Bertin, or Abbot of Thorney, this Anglo-Norman figure in the mid to late 11th century. St. Boltoph, of course, as I mentioned earlier, was labouring in the 7th century, so there's some 400 years or so between his death and the composition of the only life that we have to him. Interestingly, though, there are clear references and details within Fulcard's life, which, if you look carefully and look into the history carefully, you can see, whilst maybe not in themselves completely factually accurate, we can see who he is talking about, who he is referring to, even if he slightly gets the names wrong, the succession wrong, and so forth. So just very briefly, I'll just give a few details about his life. So we think St. Boltoph was born here in Anglo-Saxon England, and most probably here in East Anglia. I think the reason for this might possibly be preserved in his name, Boltoph, or to go and use the Anglo-Saxon rendering of it, it would be something like Bootwolf, Bootwolf. And these two words give us some indication, at least in the opinion of Dr. Sam Newton, that St. Boltoph may well have been from East Anglia. The name Bootwolf is a compound, is made of two Anglo-Saxon words. The first, boot, which means help, deliverance, atonement, or advantage. And then obviously the second word, wolf, which is what our English word wolf is. Interestingly though, wolf would have been particularly relevant to the East Anglian court. The first founder of the East Anglian pedigree of Anglo-Saxon kings was Wulfar, who was known as Little Wolf. And so the wolf, the Woofings as they became known, who Sutton Hoo have made famous, the wolf was a very significant figure. And indeed, some of you, when you came in, may have noticed at the back of the church an Anglo-Saxon cross shaft. You can see it right at the back there. That was found in the southwestern side of the tower when, very sadly, this building was all aflame. I think it was in the 60s or in the 70s, was that right? We've now got a beautiful wooden roof, but the whole place went up in smoke due, unfortunately, to an accident. But in the process, what was revealed was the flooring and some of the deeper archaeology of the Anglo-Saxon and early periods of the church. And right in the southwestern side of the tower was found this very unusual Anglo-Saxon cross shaft, which has been dated to the 8th or the 9th century, is thought to be of East Mercian derivation. This stone doesn't lie naturally around these parts, as you may have noticed. We're very flinty in the fields of Suffolk, but there would be nothing like the stone which is over there. So this would have been quite a labour to actually get this stone to this site. And again, it's thought that this large and unusual Anglo-Saxon stone cross was raised in honour of St. Boltoph, again in the 8th or 9th centuries, following the wake of the Vikings, with all the damage and violence that they left behind them, and when probably this minster here would have been destroyed. So, to preserve his memory amongst the people round about here, a cross to him was probably erected in his honour. So we can think of Boltoph then possibly as, well, certainly as an Anglo-Saxon youth, possibly of having some connection to East Anglia in some way. And then perhaps in the 620s, late 620s, perhaps he enters into a monastery. Again, we know very little about his early life, so much of this is speculative. However, from one of the details in Fulcod's life of St. Boltoph, we do believe that St. Boltoph, as we referred to in the Akathist, travelled over to Gaul to study at the monasteries over there. That was very common. We know, for example, that King Sigbert studied in Gaul and indeed became a Christian in Gaul, and it is St. Sigbert to whom we really owe the Christianization of East Anglia, for he brought with him St. Felix. And it's likely that St. Felix may well have been at one of Columbanus's foundations, whether it's Luxeuil or one of the other ones. And another important disciple of Columbanus was St. Farah, who founded a double monastery. That means a monastery which had within the same monastic, as it were, precincts, a place for monks and a place for nuns. And essentially the monks would most likely be priest monks, hierom monks, and they would serve the Mass and would also undertake other tasks for the monastery. Very commonly, though, in double minsters in Anglo-Saxon times, the head of the monastery was an abbess, and this was certainly the case at Eboriacum, as it was called in Latin. That was the monastery of St. Farah in Brie, at Farmoutier, as it's now called, after St. Farah, Farmoutier. And it was here at her monastery, at Eboriacum, that St. Boltoph would have met the daughters of King Honor. I call him King Honor deliberately, though Bede calls him Anna in the Latinate tradition, but in the Anglo-Saxon text, it was Honor rather than Anna, which obviously sounds rather peculiar. So he would have encountered these princesses, and whether he knew something of East Anglia before or not, again, this is all speculative, is thought, again in Fulcard's life, that he was persuaded by the king's daughters, who were for safety as well as for their education and instruction in Gaul, and they persuade him to come back with him to the East Anglian court of their father. St. Boltoph is very commonly, in a lot of 19th century, by 19th century historians and churchmen, referred to as the pioneer of the rule of St. Benedict. But I think this may well be more to do, perhaps, with later Benedictines wanting to make Boltoph the founder, as it were, of English Benedictinism. But certainly at that time there was no such thing as it were as a Benedictine monastery as such. It was very common in monasteries in this early Anglo-Saxon period to be more fluid in their monastic rule, in their monastic life. They would probably take from several different monastic rules, no doubt including St. Benedict's, but not being exclusively governed by the rule of St. Benedict. And certainly if, as we believe he was at Farmoutier-en-Brie, under St. Farah, he would have received, we know at that monastery they had a mixed rule. It was a mix of the rule of St. Columbanus, the Celtic rule, which came from Celtic Ireland and was very much a penitential and an ascetic monastic discipline of perhaps long periods of time in fasting and in reciting the Psalter. And this was combined with the more practical, the more gentle rule of St. Benedict. But again, it was a mixed rule. It wasn't just a purist St. Benedictine encounter that Boltoph would have had in Brie. So he then returns, we think, to England, whether in the company of Honor's daughters, in the late 640s and early 650s. And it was at this time that King Honor gave him this land at Icon, so that in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle we come across this word Iconho, and indeed this is a very good description of what we have here in Icon. Obviously today we have shortened the original Anglo-Saxon word and we've taken off the ho, but a ho topographically refers to an area of land where you have a slow rising slope, then leading to a stark, sharp embankment. And that's exactly what we have here on this little peninsula, which of course the monastery would have been within. Today it all looks very, very pleasant, very green, very pastoral, very bucolic. But back, I think, in Anglo-Saxon times, this landscape would have looked rather different. Certainly much more watery, much more marshy. And certainly the whole of this little peninsula, this little island, this ho here at Icon, would have been surrounded by the water from the River Old, which would have come round in almost a complete circle. And it's thought likely also it would have been completely, well, the tides here are still strong, and probably at high tide would have been completely cut off from the mainland, and so would have been its own holy island, East Anglia's holy island. And we also know from Folkard's life that the place was something of a wilderness. As Folkard, this is a quotation from the life of St. Boltoph by Folkard, he says, "The place was a wilderness, and while abandoned by God-fearing men, was correspondingly occupied by demons. Their phantom illusions were to be driven forth from that place by the arrival of such a great warrior of Christ, and the holy living of the faithful to be introduced, so that where until then the devilish folly superabounded, the grace of our most generous Creator might be superabundant." And we know also, I think it's at Yarnhill, only a few miles away, there was an ancient prehistoric site which may well have had religious, pagan, cultic overtones. Maybe this whole area had become, by this stage, somewhat a fearful place for the local inhabitants. And no doubt, when they refer to the marshy demons, there was some reality behind this, some darker force, some darker reality behind it. But St. Boltoph was not daunted, and as it says in the life, "But St. Boltoph, outstanding athlete of Christ, went on crushing the inane crowd, the demons, with his outpoured prayers, and making the sign of the cross, he put them to graceless flight, and with might, force of his words, forbade them admission to the region which had been granted to him from heaven. Having expelled the minions of the lawless of the cross of Christ, he set up the stranded of the heavenly power, and constructed a hall for divine dwelling. Before a short time had elapsed, he completed the work begun at the monasteries where he had sojourned in the parts of Gaul, divine love assisting him in all things. And so, once he had banished out the marsh demons from Icanhoe, here he founded his minster. Perhaps there was some initial or temporary structure here, but it was not long before the ravages of Penda came surging over this area. And if you've read Bede's account, you can see that again and again, Penda in Mercia is making relentless waves of attack against the East Anglians and the newly Christianized East Anglians. And we know that first St. Sigbert fell against Penda, and there were to be many others that would follow him. During this time, though, Honor is thought went west over into the West Country and was given refuge there. Maybe Boltoph went with him. Alternatively, maybe Boltoph went elsewhere, perhaps down south into areas which weren't so ravaged by Penda, where he could be safer. And then around about 654, this is where we have the first direct Anglo-Saxon reference to St. Boltoph, which is in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And this is an unusual reference because most of it was referring to the West Saxons. But we find here a very deliberate East Anglian reference to, in this year, 654, Honor was slain by Penda and together with his son Eomin, and that's thought to have happened at Blythburgh, just a bit further to the north at the royal court there. And Boltoph began to timber his minster at Icanhoe. So maybe there'd been a temporary structure before, but 654 it was the time when certainly it was more elaborately built in that traditional Anglo-Saxon way with these post holes, large post holes. And archaeology that was done following the fire in the 70s, just out there in the north side of the transept, they have found Anglo-Saxon post holes on a slightly different axis to the one that we are here on within the church, which is again very typical of earlier Anglo-Saxon structures. And so we are literally on the same foundation as St. Boltoph, and we are praying here where St. Boltoph himself would have prayed. So during this time, again, as was typical both by the Celtic and also by the Benedictine monks, no doubt there would have been a scriptorium here. There would have been styluses which they would have used to make the manuscripts. None have been found so far in the limited archaeology that's been done, but one was found and a wax tableted at Blythburgh. We also know there was a bakery, because there's a reference in the life of St. Ceolfrith, or Ceolfrith, who was St. Bede's spiritual father, to say that not long after his ordination at Canterbury, he came here to see St. Boltoph and to learn from him. And he certainly talks of him as being a beacon of learning and holiness. So again, we don't know exactly the layout of the monastery here, but no doubt it was an extensive site. And again, if Ceolfrith was coming here, St. Boltoph was becoming renowned. It is one of the strange things that although Ceolfrith was, as I mentioned, St. Bede's spiritual father, we don't see any reference to St. Boltoph in the ecclesiastical history. This is rather curious, but as we know, St. Bede's preference or predilection for all things strictly Roman, perhaps it might indicate something of St. Boltoph's Celtic background, possibly. Again, more speculation, but it certainly is an unusual thing. We also know that there was something of a monastic archipelago in this area. This wasn't just a lone monastery. Just across, almost straight across the River Old, if you go, I don't know how navigable it is now, but certainly you can do some of the year, go right round the church to the north side. If you look over the wall and straight across the River Old, you'll be able to see Barber's Point. And Barber's Point was again where some archaeology was done a few years ago, and they found another church on that site. Again, the Anglo-Saxon post holes giving it away. And we also know that there could have been, or that rather there was possibly a monastic site at Yarn Hill. That was the former pagan prehistoric site I referred to. And also more monastic remains have been found at Burrow Hill in Butley. So that's just a few miles further south. And again, these are just the ones that have been found so far. But again, it's pointing to the fact that there was a cluster of churches and monastic dwellings around this area. We also know just from the spread of churches that it's very likely that St. Boltoph would have made many missionary journeys. And again, the riverine location here was ideal for these Anglo-Saxons who were so skilled in seacraft, in boatcraft, and they would have been using their boats not only for trade, not only for royal or secular occasions, but also for evangelization and mission. And no doubt in one of these boats, Boltoph was going north and south, up into Norfolk, and perhaps south down and further into Suffolk and into Essex. And we can only marvel really at the range of his missionary endeavours. Certainly it's likely that he, and certainly is indicated in the life, that he was frequently missionizing around the whole of East Anglia. That's right, sorry, I got the chronology slightly muddled up there. So Abbot Ceolfrith came in 670, and then according to tradition, on the 17th of June, 680, this was the day that St. Boltoph reposed. And it refers in the life to him being in great age and infirmities, which suggests that he was a venerable kind of age. I think I'll just finish perhaps by reading a little from the very end of the life of St. Fulchard, and I also brought various little articles with me, so with some very interesting illustrations and maps, so if anyone wants to have a look at them, come and see me when we have something to eat in a moment. So I'll just finish now with the end of the life of St. Boltoph, and then I'd invite you to come kiss the icon of St. Boltoph, and we've got some icon cards that we can give you as a memory of today and to put in your icon form. When the end of his life drew near, and he was oppressed by greater sickness, his holy intentness did not fail. For those dear ones whom he had borne as sons for Christ by heavenly instruction, he warned with timely words, and he thought it sweet and pleasant to talk over and over about the rules observed at the monasteries which he had visited as a stranger. Thus the unwearying warrior of Christ, adorned by long study of the virtues, was detained by long illness amongst the brothers, a glorious old man. But at length, God summoning him from the prison house of the flesh, he put off the earthly man, as his pupils stood around him, and followed his departure with heavenly rites and sweet lamentation. Accompanied by their groans and tearful sighs, he was carried to heaven to be crowned after the long toils of this life, so that he might deserve to hear the lovely voice of the Lord himself in the heavenly region saying, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Because you have been faithful with regards to a little, I shall entrust much to you. Enter into the joy of your Lord." He was buried by his pupils in the very monastery he had himself constructed on the 15th calends of July. There, by his intercession, many glorious miracles occurred, to the praise and glory of the omnipotent God, who lives forever and ever. Amen. Holy Father, pray to God for us.